Welcome in, everyone. Thanks so much for joining me. Today, I'd like to discuss how and why Buddhists meditate. This is a pretty big topic, so this episode is not intended to be an exhaustive description of this, just some of my learnings over the years of studying and practicing mostly Tibetan Buddhism for the past 23 years. So mostly sharing from those perspectives. To start out, I just want to say Buddhism is not a singular thing. Actually, the word Buddhism is a relatively modern word. I would say a more accurate term would be Buddhisms, plural, because there's still in existence a lot of different cultural forms of Buddhism throughout Asia, South Asia. And, there are principles that these forms of Buddhism share in common. They all stem from the historical Buddha, or Shakyamuni Buddha, or some like to call him Siddhartha. They all stem from one figure, but of course, it's been 2,600 years since the time of the historical Buddha. So a lot's changed, a lot evolves, a lot gets, there's a lot of research and development that happens. And I personally think this is a good thing, as it is able to update to modern people as time moves on. It's able to update to the times that it's in, and therefore be just as powerful as the time of the Buddha and be applicable, obviously. So in order to talk about the how of Buddhist meditation, I'd like to talk about the why first, as often the how in different Buddhisms is based on the why. And so, in general, what you'll see in different forms of Buddhism is the why people meditate, why meditation is a part of Buddhism, is based on some of the early or foundational teachings of the Buddha, which described basically two opposing ways to live, or two opposing views. So, first we look at view. We look first at what was the view or set of views that the Buddha taught or put forward, asked us to look at or to investigate or be curious about. And how is that in relation to our own personal view, and also what the Buddha described as an opposing view to what he was describing as, we could say, reality, for lack of a better word. So these two opposing views are basically one view based on self-projections, based on afflictive emotions, and more or less based on a perspective that we are separate from the world we live in, or we have our own experience that's unique to the world around us, or it's not connected to the world around us. This is one kind of opposing view. And this obviously, as you could probably guess, is the view that creates suffering or dissatisfaction, or keeps us bound to a life that's, one filled with lots of dissatisfaction. And that's in opposition to the view of what Buddha taught how reality actually is, which is interdependent, meaning it's relational. It depends on parts. It depends on lots of different coexisting factors to appear. And in that statement, it is also saying that there is no one reality per se. There's also not two realities, right? So this is where we get in the deep end a little bit in Buddhism. But nonetheless, there's this sense that because things are relational, or because things are interdependent, including us, like the self, it's not findable as a singular, independent, or permanent entity. And this is the view that we take into account when we meditate as a Buddhist, right? This is the view that we study. This is a view that we think about, that we, become curious about. I would say it's not so much a belief, though I guess initially when one's studying it, it can be taken as a belief, or like a hypothesis that one is then going to check in one's own meditation and learning and study over time. But definitely it's not intended to be a belief. It's intended to be something to investigate through awareness and through one's own internal experience of practice. And we do that through two types of meditation. They generally go into the categories of what's called shamatha, or calm abiding meditation, and vipassana, or insight meditation. So I have some previous videos talking more about this. There's a video I did called What is Meditation? If you're watching this on YouTube, you can go check that out. I believe it's on iTunes and Spotify too in audio form. I talk a little bit about shamatha and vipassana, but basically these two styles, or I would say like categories of practice, make up different kinds of practices and methods for cultivating and connecting to this aware quality of mind I'm often talking about pretty much in every video. Now they work with it in slightly different ways, and they're trying to bring out a different experience through awareness. And I'll talk about that right now. But just a moment before I do that, often when we hear the term shamatha or we hear the term vipassana, sometimes we limit those to singular practices. And I just want to be very clear here. There's many types of shamatha throughout the different kinds of Buddhisms. Also, shamatha exists outside of Buddhism. It exists in different kinds of tantric Hindu lineages and Vedic lineages and Taoist lineages. Probably, there's forms of shamatha even within mystical Christianity and other kinds of spiritual traditions, right? So it's not something unique to Buddhism, the various practices of shamatha. You could say to a certain extent, vipassana, it also isn't, the way we practice it in Buddhism is kind of unique, but maybe there could be other vipassana practices and other spiritual paths as well. And similarly in Buddhism, vipassana isn't one singular practice. Often people think vipassana means a certain style of practice. Actually, there's many kinds of vipassana: analytical vipassana, resting vipassana, different lineages and traditions of vipassana, different styles of practicing it. But there is something that defines vipassana as vipassana, right? Which I'll get into now. So, shamatha is defined, shamatha is defined by more or less we are trying to connect with the aware quality of mind, which is this quality of mind that can be watchful, not just attentive. It's more of a meta attentiveness where there's attention, but there's also an awareness of that attention, or there's a knowing that we're knowing, or there's a sense of bearing witness, or I like to say watchfulness. Some people use terms like the watcher or the witnesser or whatever. I think watchfulness, as far as Buddhist shamatha, is a little more accurate of what's happening, as that word describes it better, because we're not watching something, it's watchfulness. We're also with the experience, but there's also the awareness that's kind of the meta seer, as we're in or with the experience. And watchfulness, as an English word, captures that. Shamatha is basically strengthening that watchfulness in the present moment, and cultivating a sense of clear, undistracted nowness, right? Nowness being kind of the thread you can see throughout all different kinds of shamatha practices, where it's bringing the mind into the present moment, not distracted into thoughts of the future, not distracted into thoughts of the past, and and not necessarily distracted in ruminating about the present. We're just with the raw material of the present moment. And we strengthen that. That's not natural to most people. I would say probably the majority, almost all people. We need to strengthen that quality. But it's possible because we all have awareness as a quality of our mind. We're born with it. It's not something we need to get from a religion, or it's not something someone has to give us. We have it. But a spiritual path, in this case Buddhism, can teach us how to connect with it and strengthen it. And shamatha, all the methods of shamatha, some focusing more on the concentration aspect of that, some focusing more on the aware aspect and stabilizing that, where eventually concentration comes out of that. The whole idea is to make the mind pliable. Because for most of us, the mind is not pliable. It's like a monkey running all over the place, jumping around, distracted, more or less. And so we're gathering all that. So most of you probably watching this, you either have a practice of this already, or it's familiar to you in forms of modern secular mindfulness or other kinds of meditation. So usually when people say meditation, they're referring to some kind of shamatha practice, right? Now, vipassana, or insight meditation, as we call it, this is where it gets real, you could say. This is where it gets serious, because the methods of Vipassana or insight meditation, or sometimes in Tibetan traditions, we call it special insight. These are the practices that actually liberate us from the bondage of what I described earlier in the view. It liberates us from our self-projections, which we mistake for self. It liberates us from being stuck in unconscious habits of permanence, of independence, unconscious habits of feeling centralized, as opposed to how reality actually is, which is decentralized. It's lots of parts moving, right? And this is what we mean by non-duality in Buddhism, right? Beyond the subject and object, beyond, we would say, nihilism or non-existence and existence, or nihilism and eternalism. Anyways, I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole, but just describing some of this for you. And so the practices of Vipassana or insight meditation, like I said, these can vary through the different kinds of Buddhisms. There's not a singular Vipassana practice. But with that said, all Vipassana practice does lead to clear seeing. And clear seeing what? Clear seeing that things do not exist permanently. Things do not exist independently. And so a meditator is developing that over time. And it's not a thought that's coming from. Of course, a thought or a belief or an idea could prompt us to meditate initially. But in order to be free, we need to develop the experience of impermanence. We need to develop the flavor for living life through impermanence, through the experience of interdependence, right? And this happens through these various types of Vipassana. Again, I don't want to make this video too long, so I'm not going to go into how to practice these. I just wanted to describe how the why is strongly connected to the how. And so maybe this gives some of you who are curious about Buddhism a little more perspective on what's happening with Buddhist meditation, and those who are already practicing a little more clarity. So I think I'll leave it there for now. If you like this content, let me know. Feel free, if you're watching on YouTube, leave a comment below. If you're listening on Spotify or iTunes, please email me or message me at scotttusa.com. That's my website. And give me your feedback. Do you like this kind of content? Do you want me to go into more detail on this? Do you want me to develop a series where I can go into more detail into each of these practices? Ultimately, I make this content for those of you who are watching it on a regular basis. So let me know what you think. Thanks so much, and hope everyone has a great day. Take care.